Now to a story that's been almost impossible to avoid over the past 10 days, the allegations about HSBC helping customers, rich customers, evade tax using Swiss bank accounts.
HSBC is accused of helping with tax evasion, but there's just one prosecution from hundreds of cases.
Contrast that with what's been happening in the United States and in other countries where there has been a proper investigation and prosecutions. We seem to have been particularly lenient.
Well, it's not just the BBC. Other broadcasters and newspapers have been giving the story a huge amount of coverage. But one broadsheet paper here hasn't done quite as much as some might expect. And yesterday, the Daily Telegraph chief political commentator Peter Oborne quit. And he attacked management and owners over its lack of coverage of the story, which he described as a fraud on its readers. The Telegraph, in response, said his attack was full of inaccuracy and innuendo. Let's hear what the man has to say himself. I spoke to Peter, asked him when the issues at HSBC first came onto his radar.
I had been aware that there was an issue because Private Eye has played a marvellous role, actually, in telling the story on the pages of Street of Shame. In fact, that's been the major source of information. And so I had read for Telegraph journalists about what's going on in our own paper. But when I got started to get cross was when I tried to write a story about HSBC myself. And it just couldn't get in the paper. People kept on sort of putting it on. They didn't quite say it wouldn't get in, but it just never did, if you know what I mean.
Did they say it was wrong or just not?
They just didn't get... They gave me a whole... I was told for one moment that there was a legal problem, but I went to the lawyers and they said I'm not aware of a legal problem, and then they said they'd get it in, and then it never appeared. And I just gave up in despair in the end. And then I thought, well, I'm now going to... see if there's anything in these stories by HSBC, and I made some very thorough research of the coverage of HSBC, and basically negative stories about HSBC didn't get into the paper.
There are others apart from you who have tried to write them, you mean?
I don't know, but, well, there was a particularly notorious example of our banking correspondent called Harry Wilson, who wrote a piece about HSBC's black hole in its accounts, which was offline went online and then it was offline very shortly afterwards. And who had made that decision? Who had taken it offline? Had it followed pressure from HSBC? These are the sort of questions I wanted to find out the answer to. It's a sort of, and that's a typical of, and I discovered that was a part of a pattern.
A pattern? Go on then.
Well, and it came to a head last week when the BBC, Panorama, did that superb programme into the HSBC's Swiss banking arm, and Telegraph coverage of it was minimal. And that's the moment I thought I'm going to go public. I was too cross. By the way, there are important questions for HSBC here too. I mean, The Guardian has a very important revelation today that HSBC advertising was put quotes, unquotes, on pause as The Guardian started to investigate the Swiss banking arm of HSBC. So there's a pattern here. That same thing happened to the Telegraph.
Okay.
And I think actually it's an important point that we need to put to HSBC. You need to have them on this show and ask them, why did you put the Guardian advertising on pause last week? Why did you put the Telegraph advertising on pause 2 years ago? Because it looks to the outsider as if they're using advertising as a means of...
Now, you're a journalist. That's the evidence you would put forward for the fact that HSBC had put on undue pressure, that these two pauses, that's the only direct evidence you've got.
It's very important evidence.
Okay. What evidence do you have that, where were these decisions made inside the Telegraph?
Look, I'm not clear about that either. I can't make... but I would say it came from management. I would corporate executives. And I think in the Telegraph there needs to be an inquiry now into the connections between the advertising and the editorial department.
It was ever thus, wasn't it, Peter? There's bound to be...
No.
They're bound to twitch a bit when one of their main advertisers is suddenly the object of a story.
Look, it's been don't accept that. It's been axiomatic in quality journalism that you don't have a connection of the kind we've apparently been seeing here between the advertising and news. The reader who buys the paper, the Daily Telegraph reader, has got to read the news in the knowledge that he's being told the truth, not but he's being told the version of the world as the advertiser wants to see it.
Has it happened in other examples? Do you think this is a problem which goes through the Telegraph, that there are other companies where the same thing has happened?
I'm not. I have never seen anything as egregious as this before.
But it has happened.
Well, I'd like to see examples. I mean, I'm not aware of it, actually. If you read Nick Davies' excellent book on journalism, he says it doesn't happen. I mean, he says in terms, in that book which taught journalism to shreds, brilliant book, actually,
yeah.
He said, for all the many problems that journalism had, he said that the clash of interest between advertising and news didn't happen.
I just wonder, I mean, it goes, you've spent your life in journalism, as have I. When you look back, I don't know, local papers, regional papers, I wasn't obviously aware, but I can't help thinking that there were these kind of pressures. The big advertisers felt they had a particular call on the editor's private phone. I mean, isn't that a fact of life?
I just told you no.
You really don't genuinely believe that
Look,
happened?
no, I'm not. It may be that some local papers you worked on 40 years ago had a problem. Maybe they do now. Quality national papers, it's been just to repeat myself, it's been axiomatic.
This is the way it is. Okay, so this then is a very serious dereliction of duty, isn't it? This is a serious matter if papers for the first time are giving way to the behest of advertisers.
Look, the Telegraph has to reassure its readers that they're being told the truth and not given a version of the world as Telegraph advertisers want to project. It needs to do something to reassure readers.
And just ask you one question about Sam. Were you going to leave the Telegraph anyway? Is this anything more than a kind of a last swipe at an employer with whom you've lost temper?
Look, I had pretty well, in my view, the best job in journalism, being chief political commentator in the Telegraph, in the tradition of Peter Attlee and Bill Deeds, and Charles Moore. I would never have dreamt of leaving this job.
So it's a sad day for you. And the future? What do you do next?
I have no idea.
I have no idea, says Peter Oborne. We did invite HSBC onto the programme, as Peter suggested. No one was available. There was no comment to make about advertising with the Telegraph or anyone else. The Telegraph said the distinction between advertising and our award-winning editorial operation has always been fundamental to our business. We utterly refute any allegation to the contrary. It is a matter of huge regret that Peter Oborne, who for nearly 5 years was a contributor to the Telegraph, should have launched such an astonishing and unfounded attack full of inaccuracy and innuendo on his own paper. So they certainly take it seriously, and you can see why. Let's talk about the kind of pressure which might sometimes be placed on executives, editors, reporters, and how well we're able to resist that pressure. Remember that this is an industry which is in a financial crisis at the moment. Funds are very hard to come by, and hence the pressures which advertisers are able to apply are all the greater. Paul Connew is a media commentator, used to be editor of the Sunday Mirror and News of the World, I think deputy editor of the News of the World. Roger Alton, executive editor of The Times. Paul, first of all, your general observations on this?
Well, I think Peter Oborne has taken a very brave stand, and I think, as he kept saying, it's axiomatic that there has to be that clear divide between editorial and advertising. And although I don't know the inner workings of the Telegraph on this story, certainly, my eyebrows were being raised several times last week by what was an astonishing underplaying of this story, in the Telegraph. The Telegraph remains a fine newspaper, but its news judgment was either appallingly and curiously amiss last week, or something strange was going on, and I'm inclined to think the latter is more likely.
Did you come across cases of advertisers trying to put the pressure on you at the Mirror?
On a very few occasions, and I'm talking about things with one hand, yes, but you were able to resist it, and I only had one encounter which left me with a bit of bitter taste in the mouth. Where it was more promotion than an advertiser, but in fact, where something was imposed. Well, I refused to run it, but later on, when I wasn't editing, I was deputy editor, and I'd been acting editor who refused to run a certain promotion about private healthcare, which was against, to my mind, the Mirror readers' interests. And later on, it was reinstated. But that's the only occasion in which I've ever encountered any sort of successful pressure. But I think there's a danger at the moment that with newspaper economics in a bad way, that advertisers may feel more empowered to try it.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about an industry which is a real crisis here. Let's not, I don't want to over-exaggerate it, but the fact is that papers are struggling to survive, and a big advertiser therefore has huge clout.
Potentially, yes, but I would hope, and this is the only example I've heard of a serious allegation where it would appear to have had some success, or at least, if Peter Oborne's right, it's had some success. And looking back, of course, you have to remember that in 2012, the Telegraph did a very credible investigation into HSBC. Opening accounts in Jersey for serious criminals living in Britain. That led to HSBC dropping its advertising, which is worth about £1 million a year, for about a year from the Telegraph before it was reinstated. And
well, there's an illustration. There's an illustration that their advertising is conditional upon the right kind of coverage in a newspaper, isn't it?
And if you believe, today's new edition of Private Eye, that the editor of the Daily Telegraph, Chris Evans, was desperately pleading, for the HSBC story to be projected properly, and was having, put it euphemistically, some difficulties with management on that.
Right. I have a text here from somebody who says, I am a Telegraph journalist. It's anonymous at the moment and will remain so. It says, Peter Oborne speaks for the vast majority of us. The slow death inflicted by the Barclay brothers on a once great newspaper has been obvious for years. I have to remain anonymous, and that's the trouble with anonymity. You have to kind of limit your belief in it. I mean, Peter is a pretty serious journalist, been around for a long time. Is there anything more that anybody should do about this to investigate? Because it's kind of in the national interest in a way to know whether this is happening, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly been followed up substantially in many of today's newspapers, not to mention TV and radio. So therefore, I would imagine there is a serious discomfort in the upper echelons of the Telegraph management, over this one, and and quite rightly so.
Too, yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Paul. If you've got, it's always one of those stories where ideally we should speak to people who do have some kind of inside information on this. And when I say anonymity is something difficult, I mean, if there is a good reason for anonymity, we're always prepared to respect it. So drop us a text if you genuinely know something of this issue, 85058, or if you want to talk, but you don't want to give us your name. Once we've checked your identity, we can actually make sure that your view is heard. 0500 909 693 is the number. We should stay with HSBC for a moment because of course, the investigation seems to be going on into those operations in Geneva. Imogen Foulkes is in Bern. What's been happening today, Imogen?
Well, what we see this morning is the Geneva Prosecutor's Office basically ordering a raid on the premises of HSBC in Geneva. Now, we know from the revelations last week that the work towards helping clients hide their money and evade taxes seems to have been managed out of the branch in Geneva. But in addition to that, some very serious allegations regarding money laundering, perhaps the laundering of profits made from the illegal trade in drugs or in blood diamonds. Now, those are things that I think the Swiss authorities will want to know a great deal about, because the Swiss have had very strict laws on money laundering since the year 2000. They have tried very hard to show that some of the more relaxed, shall we say, banking practices of the 70s, 80s and 90s just are not allowed here anymore. And I think there was a great deal of dismay when the HSBC revelations came out, and it appeared that it wasn't just wealthy British clients evading taxes, but something murkier than that, to do with the laundering of money. Now, Switzerland doesn't want that, and I think also wants to be very clear that it's showing that it won't tolerate it. And
right.
The raid this morning is certainly about that.
Has HSBC said anything at all about this?
I have, in fact, just give me a second, a very bold land statement. Here it is. It's just popped into my mailbox.
Thank you.
HSBC statement.
Yeah.
We have cooperated continuously with the Swiss authorities since first becoming aware of the data theft in 2008, and we continue to cooperate.
Yeah.
That's
good.
it.
Okay.
That's it.
Imogen Foulkes with a admittedly limited statement, but at least we got it to you first. Thank you very much.